Go ahead.
So with that being said, the town council has been working away with staff on a budget for 2022. And at this point, we'd like to present some of that work to the public. And Chris Spear, our CAO and treasurer, will now take the floor and make a presentation for more information to the public. If you do have any questions for staff, staff would be happy to answer them at the end of this presentation. And if we do have quorum, we could possibly just start the agenda, and that way council could add comments or at least answer questions as well. So I'll pass it over to you, Mr. Spear.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just give me a moment. I'll jump into the share screen mode here. Okay, everybody see the full screen presentation? Yes?
There you go.
There's that much of a lag? Wow. Okay, well, thank you, everybody, council, and for those that might be watching live or later on tape. This is a presentation of the 2022 budget for the town of St. Andrews. So just a reminder what the tax dollars are used for, because within the town, there's really two separate funds that are treated separately. The utility fund and what we call the general operating fund, which is where the tax dollars are received and spent on such thing as council, town hall expenses, planning services, public works, fire, police, culture and heritage, recreation, economic development are all the things that your tax dollars are used for. What's also, I should mention that's not there, is also a lot of it is used for capital purchases and as well for debt financing. So the assessment base, we just found out a couple of weeks ago that there's an increase of 11%, which is significant to the assessment base to the town of St. Andrews, which now sits at a total of $370.2 million. Probably not that surprising to everybody because of the high sales we saw through last year and through this year. It's definitely increasing market growth, as most of us have been seeing houses sell and sell quickly. And then many of us received our own property tax assessments in the last couple of weeks and have seen substantial increases in those. As a smaller part too, there was a permanent assessment gap and exemption of 1.1 million. So in English, what that means is that there were some taxpayers whose assessments had a ceiling over the last several years that were protected from any growth. I think it primarily was seniors or low-income individuals, but the provincial government decided to give up that mechanism in 2020, and early in 2021, there's an additional 1.1 million of growth, which is really the difference between the ceiling and what the houses should have been assessed at. Still using the 10% per year mechanism to prevent anything too high. For the town, we're actually number 6 in growth for 2022 out of 100 municipalities. So that's significant. In average, only speaking of cities, towns, and villages, the overall provincial growth was at about 8%. But again, the town of St. Andrews was at 11. So typically that's considered a good thing. But it's important to remember that there's 2 taxing authorities in New Brunswick when it regards to property taxes, municipalities. But we also remember the government of New Brunswick ends up taxing many other individuals, organizations, and landowners for property taxes only above the mill rate that's charged by municipalities. So as a brief history, the town of St. Andrews mill rate this year and last year was held at $1.26. Then it went from $1.19 to $1.24 in the early mandate of the last council. Now, talking about provincial property taxes, I just bring this up as FYI. Many of us that live in our own homes as a permanent residence, we only pay the local rate or the mill rate. But if you're in a residential unit, but it's non-owner occupied, you pay an additional $1.12. Some of us would see that as the personal residence deduction on our property taxes, but for those that may have a second residence in St. Andrews, they pay in the past the $1.26 plus the $1.12. Residential other, primarily rentals, is an additional $1.21 over the mill rate. Non-residential, which would be businesses, is $2.19 on top of the $1.26. So to remember, all the rates that you see before you are on top of the $1.26 charged by the municipalities. And as most of us know, both the town of St. Andrews and the local government end up paying basically 0.0194 cents per $100 of assessment, both in your property taxes, but we also pay it that is deducted from ours to help pay for the assessment services that Service New Brunswick provides. So if council held the $1.26 rate, it would create an extra $476,000 in revenue, which on a $5 million budget is significant. However, council early on realized the challenges of the 11% increase. For long-term property owners that have been in town for possibly decades, the value of their houses have increased, and through very little changes of their own, and their property taxes have skyrocketed, risking them unable to maintain the cost of their house. For businesses, it can be detrimental as well, whether it's ones that are currently set up in St. Andrews or for those exploring coming to St. Andrews. The high market value of properties on top of a high mill rate can create a barrier for new businesses setting up. Of course, new entrants into the housing market, again, are finding it difficult with the hot housing, which creates high property taxes. And as the town's finding out, when you're trying to do housing development, a high property tax can work against you. And the public should know that the town of St. Andrews does pay property taxes to the province of New Brunswick that we don't recover back. For the town of St. Andrews, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars here, the property tax revenue right now is budgeted to be about $4.4 million. Our equalization grant went down this year to $56,000 from about $63,000 in 2021. Primarily, the equalization system is based on your assessment. And since our assessment based outpaced the province in the formula, our equalization payments would have deducted. The accommodation levy is an in and out function, meaning the money comes into the town, but we redisperse it to the tourism accommodation levy, about 2/3 of it, and we keep 1/3 for our own internal business. Just as a note, the LSDs outside of town pay towards our fire department for fire protection, and $140,000 is coming in 2022 for that. And it actually went up. Recreation, which would be of note to people, is this is recreational fees related to the wharf and to the arena. It's about $400,000. And other types of revenues about $339,000. At a very high level, the expenses of the town of St. Andrews budgeted for next year is the general government is forecasted to be 1.2 million. Fire and police, 981,000, public works, 822, recreation, 660, the museums and the library, 263, fiscal services, which actually includes 100,000 to be transferred into the future, is 401,000. Solid waste removal is 165, so that's both tipping fees and the contract for pickup. But what's important is there's $790,000 that's available for capital purchases that we wouldn't have to borrow for. So as a breakdown of our total budget, administration cost about 22%. That also includes the planning services from the Regional Service Commission. Debt is about 7%. Recreation and heritage and cultures is 12 and 15%, which is a fairly significant investment for a town our size and is worthy. certainly is what makes St. Andrews a place that is attracting people, is the reinvestment by this council and past councils towards those who we call soft living services that makes a place so enjoyable to live in. Now, within the budget, we did a detailed line-by-line analysis with council over the last several weeks, but I'll just touch on some of the notes. The local planning services is up 15%, so it's from about 102,000 to 116,000. Again, that formula is heavily based on assessment base, so we're taking a little bit more because of we outstripped our neighbors in the county, but there are some salary increases in things as they have brought on staff things that, again, the town of St. Andrews has certainly benefited from over the years. Should be noted, and it was discussed about in the last council, that they did an in-depth consultants report on the salaries within the corporation, which led to several increases among staff earlier this year. And so the overall increase in staffing costs to the town year over last is about 7.5% based on the recommendations of that report, which was approved by council. It should be noted too that currently in the budget, there's a recreational director that has been budgeted for. It's in cooperation with the Regional Service Commission. They'll be working for the town of St. Andrews, mostly aimed at programming and working with various age groups and carrying out recreational activities. But it is in the budget of the Regional Service Commission. From what I understand, that it'll be going to a vote tomorrow night. Upon the completion of that vote, and if it goes as planned, as recommended by staff and the Finance Committee of the Service Commission, I believe it's the assessment of our local LSDs, 2 cents will be added to go back towards the cost of recreation and towards this rec director's salary in St. Andrews. But that person will also be expected to work with the local service districts and the reps out there towards their recreational needs as well. And but council will get more information as both budgets are approved and this person is eventually brought on. But I will say it is up to the town of St. Andrews to do the hiring and be part of our organization and not part of the service commissions. Another person has been added to Parks and Recreation, a seasonal person. So I guess you could say a half-time, full-time employment. That was actually a position that was reinstated after 2019. We tried to go a couple of summers, slimmed down. In fact, we had 2 people that were brought on for 6 months of the year. And we just finding with the additional green spaces and services that we're offering that we can't do it. So councils have invested in some machinery to help make it a little more efficient. But we've discussed and find that having that additional person should make a good asset to the town, considering the other things that we're asked to do. Something that we, I guess the public should know, that municipal insurance continues to climb, and that's Canada-wide. Talking to some of my fellow CAOs and treasurers, they're all seeing the same thing. And so since 2019, and taking into consideration what may happen this year, our rates have increased 65%. I mean, that's significant. And so our total insurance is roughly about $120,000 right now, and it could go up by another 10 or 12% next year. But I had passed around a report to council earlier today, and again, it's just that there's risk associated with municipalities that aren't associated with other types of entities like organizations and private sector corporations, and that we've been taking in a lot of the risk, and it's being reflected in our prices. There's been a lot of payouts in our organizations too, not specifically St. Andrews, but across municipalities, whether it's in the province or across the country, and it's being reflected in our rates. Something else that has gone up this year is policing. I think most of us are aware that the RCMP is, I'll use the word loosely, unionizing or coming up with a members association for their most of their non-management members. And they've been in discussions with the federal government at the end of the day, for the last few years, and they finally came into a settlement. And I believe they're owed 2 to 3 years back wages. And we have been informed that there is likely a 23% increase to our overall cost this year and next year on that, be to the tune of potentially up to $100,000 in additional policing costs. Strangely enough, in 2023, they go down some after this back pay issue is settled. The general capital fund. So right now we have a budget of $6.6 million. Of that, though, over half, 3.8, is coming from government assistance to 2 big projects, which we've talked about a lot and we'll talk about again, but of course the wharf and the trails. We've had a lot of money that are going to be able to go into reserve funds this year, and we're going to withdraw about $667,000. So for you that haven't been on councils before, that may be listening in, reserve funds are basically savings accounts that the municipality has with surpluses or unpurchased capital projects that they can put ahead for future use. So we're withdrawing that money for next year. We do have $1.1 million, near 1.2 in new borrowing forecast. As we talked about before, we have $790,000 in tax revenue. And then we'll talk about housing, and we are expecting from this fund about $207,000 recovery on the new housing development. So the Keynote projects are the wharf and Market Square rebuild. That's $5.5 million project over 2022 and 2023. But as mentioned earlier, there's 3.7 million of that has already been promised from other levels of government. So that's already not in hand, but promised to us, in that once the projects go, the funding will be available. We've also have another project on trail development. 1.5 million was approved in total, of which 1.2 million is coming from the other levels of government towards that funding. This council made it the #1 priority, and it was talked about a lot at the election time. And as staff moved ahead, you've heard a lot of our council discussing housing. We've been working with different avenues to try to establish more housing to meet the needs of new people and those that may not be able to afford the current hot housing market in the town. So the council has set aside 1.8 million between this budget and the utilities budget towards possible projects, including, and this is primarily establishing the infrastructure for projects. So that's in ground and streets and roads to access lands so that developers can build projects on them, or if council decides to go into single residential lots in an area so homeowners can buy them. There is an expectation in this budget that half of the recovery on land sales. So for developers that might be watching this, think we have $2 million to give away. We don't. That council is looking for half of that at least to be recovered, and they may even decide up to 100% could be recovered. But realizing the crisis we're in, they said to set the budget at this, the rest would have had to been borrowed. But there'll be discussions on a project by project basis of how much may be released, or how much the town will invest in certain projects as far as providing services compared to developers. Other smaller projects of note is there's a backhoe replacement due this year for $155,000, asphalting for $362,000. We know that's been a struggle. The price of gas, and knowing that paving is primarily diesel, it seems we get less and less for more money these days. We do have $100,000 in storm sewer upgrades. This includes separation at the arena. We started a multi-year project in the roof that was originally tied into the sanitary when the project was built back in the 70s. And so we've been removing that over the last few years, and this will be the final phase in that, included in that, plus one block of street within the town. And then arena plan upgrades for $168,000. Continuing work on the plant, some that was done, this council authorized $100,000 of refurbishments to be completed this fall, which has been done. And for you that haven't seen the notice that the ice actually is being constructed as we speak, and the opening, as we told our users, on November the 1st will take place for sure. I ahead of myself a little bit here, but this is the utility fund that we're jumping to. And the utility fund has its own sense or problems. And as I think most people understand, the utilities are treated separately from the general tax revenue. And in essence, the municipal governments, or sorry, the provincial governments want utilities to try to stand on their own. There are allowances for some money to be transferred from revenue, from tax revenues into utilities, but for the most part, it's all supposed to be recovered through user fees. So right now, the St. Andrews combined rate is about $580 annually. And the average among all towns and villages around our size is about 635. So that's water and sewer. There's some that are quite a bit lower, but then we see some that are well over $1,000 a year. So council is considering that to increase our utility rates to the average of other municipalities across the province. So we could potentially see a $55 increase in those rates next year. Mind you, that's over the whole year, so that'd only be a $27 increase per billing period. They are also asked staff to work in a rate increase of 3% for high volume users. Now, they had a huge increase in 2018, some of them seeing a 200 or 300% increase in their water bills, and council feel it was unfair to hit them at this point again with a huge increase. However, they feel in keeping up with inflation that the 3% is a reasonable request. But the reason is simple. Right now, we have between $5.8 and $6 million of in-ground infrastructure that should be replaced. So this is old technology or things that a certain pipe, they would say, would have a 30 or 40 year life cycle. And right now it's been in the ground for 50 to 60 years. And this thing, and it's a phrase that was used a few years ago a lot, was this infrastructure deficit. And it's common right across the country. And frankly, it's common right across North America, that there wasn't a good practice by governments at all levels to save money to treat their, or to replace and refurbish their existing infrastructure, that the tax money was always used to create new. And so a lot of us are playing catch up in this now at all levels. And for the town of St. Andrews, again, that's about 5.8 million. But there's also an additional $1 to $1.5 million per year in ongoing replacements. So in addition to the pretty near $6 million that we're behind, every year there's another $1 million to $1.5 million that should be replaced on an ongoing basis. And remembering it's a 50 to 60 year life cycle. But council wants to continue this ongoing reinvestment, but also begin to address the backlog of projects that the longer we ignore it, the worse it gets. And inflation is just going up tremendously. Myself and the operations manager were talking a couple of weeks ago, and both of us have been here for about a decade and a half. And when we first started, about $100,000 to replace all the infrastructure on one block of the town. Now it's up to over $300,000. So over that 15 years, the price of infrastructure work has gone up 300%. One thing that staff is going to be applying for partnerships and for funding to alleviate the load. There's different programs for the federal government, but there's also other avenues we can go. And so we'll be putting in project after project until, hoping to get some that'll help reduce the cost to the town as much as 60 to 70% by getting other levels of government or the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, who has a big fund of money given by the federal government towards infrastructure improvements for municipalities. So in the utility budget, the water treatment plant upgrades down on the Harkness Road is about $96,000. It's about the end of a 3-year project, and this will get that place working for another decade and a half without much major reinvestment. The facility is about 17 years old, and it's due for its midlife refurbishment to extend it out to its 30 to 40 year life cycle. And so this is an expected cost. Water main upgrades. So these are the routine water mains that we were talking about earlier. And so there are sections of Prince of Wales, and again, these aren't the whole streets. These are just one block sections of Prince of Wales, Ernest Street, Sophia, Princess Royal, and Cornelia Streets that will be, if passed, will be addressed next spring, summer to upgrade the facilities for those neighbors. For anyone that's really interested, if you want to contact the town hall tomorrow, we can tell you exactly what blocks are being upgraded if passed by budget. And discussed earlier, some of the funding for the new housing development is also in this budget, as funding for roads and above ground work goes into the general capital fund, but any water and sewer lines has to come out of the utility capital budget. This is my last slide, so you're ready, Your Worship. But with all this debt talk that I've been bringing forward, I just want to let the public know that council's being extremely responsible with that with the growth we're seeing, we're able to take on extra debt without it having a significant impact on our budget. And again, with all levels of government, we talk about debt servicing, which is basically the percentage of your debt that is used towards servicing, or sorry, the percentage of your budget that is used towards servicing debt. And currently in the general fund, we're about 5% of total budget. By 2023, when you consider all the projects we've got ahead before us, it rises to 7%. Within the provincial government, 10% is considered normal for towns, that if municipalities float between 8 and 12%, they have no problem as long as the projects are worthy and nothing too crazy. That's considered a healthy municipality. I will mention that 20% is allowed by legislation, but you're going to have to prove that you have to need that money awful bad to do that, to get up to that level. But as I say, considering the amount of capital investment that this council is making over the next couple of years, 7% should be considered a great goal. The utility fund is different, and as you can imagine, the utility fund is heavily in the infrastructure. That's most of the cost. That the operating, which I didn't touch on much, is relatively small compared to the cost of the equipment used to run it. And so really, right now, the utilities debt load is about 21% of budget, which is still considered good. It rises to 30% in 2023, which again is still considered very healthy, and will allow the council in the future to consider additional projects if they want to take on additional debt to take on more of this backlog that we spoke of earlier. And certainly in talking with the province, they consider 30% or more sustainable, as long as we have rate increases to match what we're doing and that we're doing projects that are deemed necessary. They have no problem with that. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you very much,
And
Mr.
again,
Spear. Appreciate that. Since we do have quorum now, what I'll do is I'll just formally call it to order, just so if there is any discussion or anything like that, that it be that it would make sense. So at this time, I'm going to call to order the special meeting of council here on Wednesday, October 27th at 7 p.m. And it's obviously been aired via Zoom and streamed through Facebook. Anyone that has any questions, it probably says above it on social media, but you can email pnopper@townofstanders.ca. So I note that all members of council are here, with the exception of Councillor Heenan, who has another engagement kind of related to town council. And then as well, Councillor Gumashell is not in attendance. I'll look for a mover to approve the agenda. I see Councillor Neal and seconded by Councillor Blanchard. Any discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the agenda, please raise your hand. That's everybody. The agenda has been approved. Disclosure of conflict of interest, seeing none. And we just received a presentation in advance from Mr. Spear. So thank you very much, Mr. Spear. There's nothing else really above it, but we really want to just get this formally into question period. So Mr. Knopper, has anything come in advance or during the presentation to make council aware of it this time?
Through your worship, no, I've received no formal or no correspondence prior to the meeting, and I have posted out to the public that they could call or email during this from the beginning, and I've received no commentary back.
Thank you, appreciate that. So just under Councillor and Deputy Mayor's comments. So is there any comments from anyone on the from council at this point? I do have a few comments as myself, but just seeing if there's anyone would like to add. All right, so I appreciate everybody jumping on. This is what I would call an extra step in being transparent. All of our meetings in regards to the budget were held in a public forum. Some people would have had the opportunity, and some of them to watch online. We did have a workshop as well, but I guess in summary, I'm for our first time going through a budget, pleasantly surprised. A lot of big decisions are made, not just about this budget, but also looking ahead even next year. And I think the thing that is most impressive is I know that we're not the only municipality that saw large increases in our assessment value, but it's easy just to always take more, because the reality is every municipality really does need more. We have aging infrastructure, we have services we'd like to provide, and it doesn't take too much out there to realize that almost everything you do, the costs are significantly increasing to do business, no matter what business you're in. But for this council to take a position to actually, and again, I'm assuming it passes, to lower the mill rate. I don't know how many other municipalities have done that, even though the assessments are so high. So to take the mill rate from $1.26 per 100 of assessed value to drop it down to $1.20. In my and I guess recent history, I don't think that there's been any decrease in the mill rate in the history of St. Andrews. But that being said, I understand the assessments are increasing at probably a record, but to go and do that for people that need it, we know that we need to grow our tax base, but I think we're all committed to doing it the right way, doing it in a fair way, and to expect the taxpayer, like almost all taxpayers in St. Andrews, pay 10% more. You know, that's a little aggressive. So I just want to recognize your efforts. There is projects that we would love to get to right now, but you know, in a perfect world, we're talking about housing solutions. The way we get there is not so much of increasing the taxes on our current residents, it's actually attracting new residents and building new places in our community and growing our tax base in a healthy and sustainable manner. So for you guys to see the big picture, greatly appreciate it. In order for us to see the big picture and to have these budgets, and I know there wasn't as many drafts as previous years, but it doesn't take away from the work that our staff did. Mr. Spear, I appreciate you doing the presentation. I appreciate all your work that you've done in preparing these budgets for us. I know you're not the only one. Emily has probably had an active role in behind every one of these. You look at things like some of our asset management, Terry Acton, but I know that you've met with department managers, probably from Nate McMullen to, you know, you name it. I'm sure Paul's had some input. I'm sure that any department manager, probably a lot of employees have given you some input on what's really needed. Think of the fire department with Kevin Terrio. I don't want to leave anyone out, Debbie Lord, but I guarantee you that you've had conversations with all of them. And to make this a clear and easy process for new council, I just wanted to say it doesn't go unnoticed. We're very grateful for that. So thank you for everything that staff did. I don't think we're going to get along on necessarily everything over the course of this term, but to go through this budget exercise the way that we did the first time, it's a lot of work, don't get me wrong, but I think we're kind of aligned as one team, and I really felt like everybody had a voice in the budget meeting. So kudos to all of you, and I appreciate you being on here tonight, and we'll have this hopefully passed in the near future. I know I gave a little spiel. Is there anything else that anyone would like to add before we kind of go to adjournment? All right, so that is perfect, guys. At this time, we have no need to go to closed session, so I'll be looking for a motion to adjourn. Deputy Mayor Akaji, a seconder. Councillor Hurdle, all in favor of adjourning? We're gone. Thanks for doing this, Chris. Appreciate you giving us some exposure on it. Thank you very much.